Judy, episode 10. And today we're going to take a little bit of a different angle. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the places we live. Some of them are in North Dakota, but some are going to morph into other places.
And it was kind of crazy because all of us kids moved out within the same 6-month period. And did you ever get a little discussion on, hey, when you get your own place, we should pay attention to XYZ, pay your bills on time? Do you remember anything like that?
Never got any kind of a heads up or any kind of direction on what that looks like. I do remember before I moved out, I started actually accumulating supplies for my place. And I think mom and dad were kind of bummed out about that because mom would come down into my room and I had a big tub. And in that tub, I had toothpaste and toothbrush, just all the stuff that you needed to live on your own. And I think mom got kind of sad about that. But one other thing, Judy, mom and dad always, I think a little bit while we were growing up, were like, I can't wait till you guys get out of the house, and half joking, but some reality to that. So, we took them to heart. Like you said, within 6 months, we all split.
Yeah. And for me personally, I was really young, which I'll talk about in a second, but I don't ever remember any kind of discussion on how to manage your money, how to do anything. I mean, not a single conversation. And then, of course, no classes in school because we were too busy taking bowling and curling and skiing and all those, the big priorities of things that we needed.
Hey, public schools that taught you things that not necessarily you're going to use later in life. The math that we learned, we don't need that anymore. You got calculators now and everything. It does it for you. Spelling, I was a spelling champion. Who cares? You got spell check.
Okay, nerd.
I had to sneak in that I was a spelling bee champion.
All right, well, whoop-de-doo. I moved out right after I turned 17, like 2 months after I turned 17. I don't know if you remember that, but I did graduate early. Not that, I was smart. Had nothing to do with being smart, but I graduated December 1980. And because I actually was going to move to California, go to Pepperdine University and live in a cabana with one of my friends. So that was kind of the plan. So that was kind of the dealio. Of course, I couldn't get into Pepperdine. We couldn't afford Pepperdine, and there was no cabana dreams coming true for me.
Pepperdine just sounded cool. I was like, I don't even know what that school does or specializes in, but it'd be cool to say, I went to Pepperdine. Judy, I also left at 17. By the way, I was class of 80, graduated, left immediately after I graduated at 17. But to your point, you were a young 17. I was a mature 17.
And my Pepperdine dreams were crushed. I was telling one of my neighbors about it, who actually went to Pepperdine. I had no idea until I told the story. But I moved into not the dorm, and I ended up obviously not going to Pepperdine, not even a university. I ended up going to Bismarck Junior College. And really, at that time in our generation, a lot of people didn't go to college. It wasn't really advocated. I didn't move into a dorm. I didn't know what that even was. I rented a little apartment, which was really a room in some lady's house in Bismarck, North Dakota. I rented the place. I signed the lease. I'm all excited. Mom and dad helped me, get all my stuff down there. And anyway, I got evicted before I ever even moved in. Yeah. So I hadn't even spent one night in the place and I got evicted. And it was crazy.
Happened? What happened? What'd you do?
It wasn't like I threw a rager in a one-room place. It wasn't even that. It was really bizarre. I went down. I was excited one day before, a few weeks before I was going to move in. And I had my stuff in there and everything was there. But I went out for the day. And when I was in my place, I'd smoked in there. It's my place. I rented it. I know I was a smoker at the time, though I had a big old ashtray. I had my cigarette butts in there. I come back from my little shopping excursion, and my ashtray is empty. And I'm like, did the landlady come into my place and clean out my ashtray? Which was weird. I'm like, no permission, no nothing. And then there's an eviction notice on the door. Out with it at the end of the month. Well, I wasn't even going to move in till the end of the month. I'm like, I don't even know how that happens. Evicted, first place, first experience, note to self, don't ever live in somebody's house. Don't rent a room, bad idea.
Judy, I'm going to say if the landlady's going into your room and micromanaging what you're doing and cleaning out your ashtray, you don't want to live there because that would have ended up being a situation where you're like, what the hell did I get into?
Yes.
So you're actually kind of lucky, I think, that you got out of there. Because back then you could smoke. Smoking was allowed. Now they have, the no smoking apartments and no smoking rooms, and you can't smoke anywhere, which is a good thing.
You could smoke in a grocery store then. Yeah. It was a crazy time.
Yeah, I remember smoking everywhere. And, even at work where, guy next to me, non-smoker, I'm over there chain smoking. I'm going, hey, horrible. Yeah. But That's how things have changed. Judy, also, I got a similar kind of thing. At least I got to live in my apartment for a few months before I got evicted. Funny that we both got evicted from the first place that we lived. Same deal, 17 years old, moving to Minneapolis, going to Brown Institute. The folks help drive me out there. I get a room, and the lady's name, by the way, I've got landlords, Minnie and Millie, that I'll tell you about. This is Minnie in
No Mickey?
Minneapolis. No, Mickey. Could have been Minnie Mouse, maybe, but that's old lady, had a big house in Minneapolis down 34th Street and off of Bloomington, if you know Minneapolis in that area. Big house. And basically the second and third floors of this house are individual rooms that get rented out. And then she's downstairs. I think she's by herself, might have her daughter living with her, but she's downstairs. There's 6 guys all going to Brown Institute living on the second and third floor. Well, we throw a couple of parties. She gets, a little wacky about that and warns us. Well, one night, not party related, our individual rooms locked. Well, one night, I don't know what happened. I think I had a nightmare and I ran out of my room and the door would close behind you. So I ran out of my room in my underwear. That's all I'm wearing. Just wearing my underwear. And I go out of my room. It's 2:00 in the morning.
Tidy whities, here you go.
Yep. All of a sudden, boop, door shuts. I'm like, what the? How do I get back into the room? I can't, oh my God, I got to go downstairs and wake up Minnie and knock on the door. Bang, bang, bang. And she opens the door and she kind of already probably didn't like me because of a couple of the parties we had. Well, here I am standing, wasn't a party night, it's a school night, but she opens the door and here's one of her tenants standing there almost nude, wearing just Hanes underwear and looking at her going, I got locked out of my room. So then she, obviously let me back in the room. But eventually what happened is we had another party. It necessarily wasn't a rager, but we had probably, I'm going to say 15, 20 people over, second floor of this house. We've got beer. Somebody made marijuana brownies, and we are having a good old time. Well, she starts screaming up the stairs about the party to shut it down and this and that. And she was a little bit off the rails anyway and unhinged and whatnot. And not a nice lady.
I wonder why.
Yeah.
Traumatized in the night by bright white underwear.
Hey, listen, if you're an old grumpy lady, don't have 6 future broadcasters in your house because what do you think's going to happen? Well, the reason I got evicted, Judy, was that we were having this party. She's yelling up the stairs. I took a hammer and she had one of those old cast iron steel radiators and, to heat the house. And I went up with the hammer and started banging on that. And that, resonated, I think, through all 3 stories of that house. Well, within 48 hours of doing that, which was stupid on my behalf, but within 48 hours of doing that, got the eviction notice and had to move. Similar to your story, got to live there a little bit. Longer than you did, but got evicted. First place I ever lived in my life. And by the way, the only time in my life I've ever been evicted.
Yeah, that was the case for me too. But how did she know it was you?
I think somebody told on me. I was thinking about that as I was telling the story. I was like, wait a minute. How did
was
I
it
get
just
singled
you
out?
that got evicted?
Yeah. The other 5 guys still live there. Donny got this is Donny luck. We've talked about, bad things.
Listen, don't say that's luck. You have a hammer. You know what I mean? I don't know what part of that's his good idea, like many of your other things. But I don't know. Why did I get evicted and no one else? But I'm going to guess you were probably the only one with a hammer.
I deserved it. But Judy, I got to ask back to your story. What'd you end up doing? You're at 17. You get evicted. You haven't even moved in, technically. What happened?
Well, it's crazy because I thought, well, one, I wasn't going to tell my folks I got evicted in, the place that they helped me find because totally embarrassing. And I didn't want to hear I told you so. So I am apartment shopping. And again, my budget was like $90 a month. I was a student. I don't even think I had a job yet down there. I answered an ad in a paper and I went to this old Victorian home that used to be like a governor's mansion or some other kind of mansion before North Dakota was a state. It was like the Dakota Territory. The place was massive. I went in there and it looked kind of creepy. It looked haunted. And there was the owner of the building painting. I went in there and I said, hey, I'm looking for a place to live and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, how old are you? And I'm like, 17.
Wow.
And yeah. And so anyway, he's painting. And I said, how much is the rent? And he's like, it's $125. Well, I'm like, whoa, that is way over my budget. I can't afford $125. I said, you need an apartment manager? I said, maybe I could manage this building for you. He's like, you're 17. I said, "Yeah, but I'm in business school. I think I'll be really good at this." He's like, "It's kind of a rough crowd that that lives in the building." He goes, "Sometimes you have to serve eviction notices and things." I said, "I got it. Don't worry." And in my mind, I was thinking, "Yeah, I'm going to have my dad do all the repairs or whatever work needs to be done in the place." But I got the job and I got my rent at $90. But I got a lot of other crazy things happened in that weird building.
Well, kind of weird that you went from being a tenant, although you technically weren't in that other place, went from being a tenant to now being the landlord, now being the one that's going to go in there and
Oh,
go, hey,
totally.
but hey, what a cool gig at 17, though, to be an apartment manager. Didn't somebody die on your watch in that apartment, or what happened?
Well, there was a lot of crazy things that happened, and yes, that did happen, and I'm gonna save that story for a little bit later, but I will
Okay.
tell you that the person that lived below me was from the state pen. So he had been in the I called him my pen pal. But
Wow.
he ended up being a really nice guy, and then he had a little heroin addict friend that would come over too. Also a nice guy. Felt bad for me because I was like a college kid, so they'd bring me up dinner and stuff like that. Pen pals in the first floor, and then some other kind of criminals around the corner. That place had 12 apartments in it. And first week, I do have to evict somebody with the sheriff because, didn't know if there's going to be some domestic thing. So anyway, kind of crazy on that end.
Early County Sheriff coming down to help you evict. Hey,
Yes.
what did rent get knocked down to because you were managing?
$70. Yeah. So
Winning.
it was a really cool apartment. It was like, again, it was a studio apartment. It wasn't just a room. It was super nice. It was like Rhoda's place on Mary Tyler Moore.
Wow. Nice.
So anyway, Rhoda was the cool one.
So I got to tell you, I went from Minnie to Millie, and Minneapolis was Minnie. And then I got my first radio job. I went to Brown, obviously, in Minneapolis, got my first radio job in Gillette, Wyoming. The folks, again, helping out. They moved me to Minneapolis. And then when it was time to move to Gillette, Wyoming, they came to Minneapolis, helped pack up all my gear. We came back, made a pit stop in Minot for a little bit of time. And then I had to embark on my career, my solo life in broadcasting. So
Hey,
I
wait,
moved to
wait. I got to ask. So Millie is the lady's name?
Minnie was the landlord in Minneapolis. Millie, which we're getting to, was the landlord in Gillette, Wyoming. So back-to-back landlords, Minnie and Millie. Well, Millie was kind of a nut job as well. And normally we don't mention names, but I'm pretty sure that both Minnie and Millie aren't around anymore. We're not throwing last names out there, so nobody's going to be able to identify. We have no pictures, no evidence. But yeah, I went from Minnie to Millie. Well, I rented a trailer. And mom and dad helped me, and we look around Gillette, Wyoming. And by the way, in Gillette, men outnumbered women 12-1. Big coal town, and it was a lot of guys. And when I lived there, I think it was 17,000 people. And now it's double or triple that. A lot of people live there. But I rented a trailer. Millie was my landlady. From there, I decided, mom and dad came down one time to visit me, and they're like, hey, why don't you buy your own trailer? And not even thinking about how broadcasting works and that it's a very transient industry. It's going to be a lot of moving around. You want to move up in the broadcast industry, you're going to have to move from Gillette to a bigger market and hopefully, one day get into a major market. So didn't really have the foresight to think that. So when mom and dad are like, hey, why don't you get your own trailer? Yeah, went out and got a loan. Dad co-signed on it and got my own trailer. Ended up living there. But back to the men outnumbering women. I lived there, Judy, for the better part of a year. Never had a date. There's no girls in town. Well, there's a girl that works at the radio station, and she's the news lady. And again, not going to mention names, but her name actually was the name of a superhero. She's the news lady. Well, her and I start dating, but we're secretly dating because the radio station doesn't want us to date. They had one of those rules that, hey, and they didn't even take into consideration, Judy, that men outnumbered women 12-1. They're just like, you're screwed. Hey, so what that there's a good looking girl working in the news department? You can't date her.
By the way, my robot vacuum cleaner's named after her.
Oh,
So,
okay. Okay.
not that
Well,
that means anything, that she was the maid.
Hoover, no. Sucking,
Yeah, definitely
no.
not that.
Yeah, no. Yeah, we're not going there with that. So she had the name of a superhero, didn't have any superpowers. So anyway, I was dating her, and the radio station eventually found out about it within a week. I was fired. The radio station just went ballistic on me, just for other things as well. And I really hadn't done anything bad. I was the afternoon drive DJ, got fired on a Friday, and I'm like, oh my God, this is just a nightmare. So evicted from my first apartment, fired from my first job in radio. And that might sound worse than it actually is. I actually had people that told me later that you haven't really worked in the industry until you've been fired. So kind of took that into a little bit of consideration, but still bummed out I lost my job. Well, the news girl, again, to remain nameless, told a friend of hers what happened. Well, the friend was a reporter for the Casper Star-Tribune, the state newspaper in Casper, Wyoming. Well, they ended up writing a story about it. And I remember the headline, and it wasn't the front page, but it was like page 3. And the headline across the top of the paper on page 3 said, "Radio romance cost DJ his job." And then they did a whole article about this girl and I and dating and getting fired. Well, I got so much publicity out of that, Judy, that within a week, I had multiple job offers. So I had a job offer from Bismarck, North Dakota. Well, the news girl ends up quitting her job and moving with me. So this girl lived with me for a while, and everything was kind of going good. And I remember I went up, I got to just tell you a real quick funny story about mom and dad and kind of where they're at with us. You know, again, not preparing us to live on our own or any
Nope.
of that kind of stuff. So this girl comes to live with me in Bismarck. Mom and dad are kind of weird about it. And I go up, state fair. Judy, the state fair's going on. Yeah, this is old school. In fact, my grandma wouldn't talk to me. Oh, Donny's shacking up with some girl.
Yeah.
You know, and grandma lived in the same town in Bismarck. So no communication with her because I'm living with a girl. Well, the North Dakota State Fair is going on up in Minot. I drive up for the day just to visit mom and dad. And the weirdest thing happens. Dad goes, "Hey, I want to talk to you. And
I
I want to pull you in the backyard and just have a chat with you." And Judy, you're not going to believe it. I'm 19 years old. 19. And you know what Dad wanted to talk to me about?
I know.
What? What?
The birds and the bees.
Yes.
Like, hello.
Yeah. Yeah. It was the birds and the bees discussion. And I almost had to say, Dad, hey, listen, 4 or 5 years ago or longer, this would have been a great discussion after I've lived in Minneapolis under the guidance of Minnie, and after I'm in Gillette, Wyoming, living the landlady named Millie, and in a town where men outnumbered women 12-1, and I finally get a date and a girlfriend, and now you're telling me a year later about the birds and the bees. It was I still tell that story to people. I'm like, yeah, I was 19 years old, and my dad's like, hey, let me tell you how this
After
all
you're
works.
living with somebody. Well, I have to tell you, and I'm going to go back to your story too in a second, but I have to tell you, when I moved into that apartment, the one where I was the apartment manager for, they thought they were going to give me a curfew, and I lived in a totally different city.
Wait, mom and dad giving you a curfew?
Yeah. They're like, you got to be home by midnight. I'm like, what are you talking about?
Wow.
I'm going out to happy hour, and I'm going with my fake ID, and I'm going to go get some pink squirrels on ladies' night. Got to go back, though, real quick, because there's a couple of things that I'm curious about in your story. One, Gillette, Wyoming, I do think that's like another nowhere. That is a total middle of nowhere. And it's also, wasn't it the Razor City?
It was nicknamed the Razor City, Gillette, Wyoming. What's funny is when we drove out there, we're driving through Southwest North Dakota, the Badlands, Theodore Roosevelt National Park. We get into South Dakota. We got the Black Hills, Rapid City. We get into the beginning part of Wyoming. There's Sundance. It's gorgeous. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I'm going to be living in just a beautiful place, Gillette, Wyoming. And wow, this is awesome. Well, then I saw a sign as you're driving down the highway. I think it was Interstate 90. As you're driving down I-90 headed west after Sundance, Wyoming, it flattens out. And all of a sudden, it goes to Nothingsville, where, again, to your point, middle of nowhere, and it's coal country, and it was like this town that they built in the middle of nowhere, and nothing was around there, no scenery, no anything. So not to trash Gillette, and not that I have any fond memories at Gillette, it was dusty and dirty and ugly town. And again, back to that men outnumbering women, it was just a really bad place for me to start my career in radio. Although I will tell you real quick, they did pay well. That was a high-paying job for a first job in radio.
I remember, right, you were one of the only guys that got out of your class that got like a true radio gig right away, too. So that was cool. Didn't the folks, I have to ask, didn't they come and visit you one time, too, when there was like another nightmare? It seems like you were in this phase where you had these crazy-ass nightmares all the time.
Oh, so
woke up screaming in your underwear.
yeah. This first trailer I lived in with Millie was an old school trailer. and it had mice. And that's why I
Mm.
eventually got out of there. I'm like, okay, I can't handle this. Well, anyway, it had, drawers in the kitchen. And I remember like the second or third drawer from the floor had like mice droppings in it. I'm like, what the? And then at night, you could sometimes hear them. The mice crawling and walking. This might be TMI for our podcast. Anyway, Judy, yeah, you're right. Mom and dad are over one night. I'm sleeping in bed. Well, all of a sudden, I had this nightmare that I was being attacked by mice. And they were on the bed, and it wasn't happening, but I actually got up, and I was, like, on my bed going, "Ah, ah," and mom comes running in, "Hey, Donny, what's going on? Mice! Mice! This is horrible!" Oh, that was within a day or two, we went trailer shopping, and I got a brand new trailer. And by the way, I've never lived in a trailer again. I don't want anybody to think that, and nothing wrong with a trailer.
Yeah, nothing wrong with the trailer.
Trailers are okay, but
Yep.
not for me, and especially not one with mice.
Wasn't the sheriff in that town, wasn't there some corrupted thing there too where the sheriff had the same name as you?
Judy, this is actually very bizarre, and it almost makes me kind of think that that's maybe the only reason they hired me, and I got again this high-paying job, an afternoon drive in Gillette, Wyoming. Well, when I get there, I find out that the police chief who's under investigation, his name? Exactly my name. Don Schneider is the police chief in Gillette, Wyoming. And he apparently he did some shady things and was in trouble and had to resign under fire. Well, all of a sudden now there's
Allegedly.
yeah.
Allegedly.
Yeah, and you know what's funny is we just did mention somebody's name, so
Yeah.
hopefully that guy's not around anymore.
Yeah.
But hey, if you got my name, then we're going to talk about it. So,
Wait. And then I have
what?
one more thing because it's like Gillette seemed, like I said, for nowhere, just it could have been anywhere. Is it funny that the thing you do there, it still ends up on the news? Whatever it is, no matter what it is on our family, it ends up on the news.
Yeah, getting fired, working in Gillette and having the same name as the police chief. And although I didn't necessarily get any press on that, I do remember one specific, like my first week on the job, and I used my real name on the radio. And I always wanted to use a fake name, which I eventually did. And we'll get into that in future podcasts and some of our fast forward stuff. But I always wanted to have a fake name. Well, I get to Gillette and they're like, no, we want you to use your real name. And I'm like, okay, I don't know why. Well, I eventually found out why, because the police chief had the same name and they thought it would be funny. Well, my first week on the job, I get a call. I answer the request line. Oh, I want to hear a song. The lady or whoever it called said, is this Don Schneider? And I said, yeah. And they said, we're calling because of this. And it might have been like a bill collector or some illegal activity, or they're trying to find the former police chief. And weirdly, I had to tell the lady that was calling me to say, hey, listen, that's the police chief you want. I'm the radio guy. I'm the 19-year-old radio personality that has nothing to do with what you're doing, has nothing to do with what you're looking at or looking for. So it was kind of just odd that the actual police chief that you think would be like this high upstanding individual was the criminal, Don Schneider, which, I had some goofy stuff happened in my past that you think that Donnie's the one getting in trouble. No, it was the police chief. Donnie was actually embarking on his radio career, first job in radio, doing a good job, but being accused of already criminal activity because I had the same name as that dude. Weird.
That's why I was like, I think there's a whole lot more to Gillette. We got to have a whole episode. Gillette,
I forgot about
Wyoming,
Judy.
the
I
Razor City.
I completely forgot about that.
I remember coming to visit you once there too, and I think when I was there, you had a nightmare too. So you must have had some kind of night terror thing going on about all the bad things you did, because I think you dreamt that a train was coming through your place too. I want to go back to my old governor's mansion because again, that place was interesting, and I did with the pen pals. I did spend Easter with them canoeing on the Mississippi River, so which was kind of a fun little Easter. No heroin or anything like that, but one of my jobs as the apartment manager was I had to take out ads, screen the people, and paint and turn over the apartments, clean in between, all that kind of boring crap. And except our dad did a lot of that work for us, which was really, really nice that he always
Yeah.
helped. So that was nice. But there was some whack-a-doos living there. I mean, crazy whack-a-doos. There's this lady that lived in the basement. And I'm telling you, if the building was built in the 1800s, and it has a basement with like I don't know, maybe a 6-foot ceiling. That's
A
not a
cellar, a
place.
cellar.
Yes, yes. And I don't even know how that passed any kind of fire marshal test or whatever, because I'm like, how are you getting out? But there's all kinds of, I don't mean to say grossness, but it's creepy down there. And pipes and whatever. But I go down there for some reason. I'm down in the basement. And she is down there feeling the walls, touching the walls. And I'm like, is she on drugs or what the hell is going on here? And again, I'm like 17. And I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, I'm looking for the passage. I said, what? Yeah. She's like, I'm looking for the passage. I said, the passage to what? A passage to China. Dee-dee-doo-doo-dee-doo-doo-doo.
She thought
Creeper.
she thought there was a wormhole in the basement and she was gonna
Yeah.
escape,
Yeah.
not to some other time, but to
Yeah.
the other side of the planet.
Yes.
Okay, this is one of your tenants?
Yes.
Did
They
you
were
evict her?
all
Did you
strange.
evict her? Hey, listen, if you're in the basement, if you're in the cellar looking for a passageway, get out. We don't want you here.
Yeah. Well, again, what does it say about me that I'm even living in this place? You know what I mean? Because I needed a place. And a lot of the apartments were actually quite cool. But I was also a little bit inexperienced with paying bills and doing all of this stuff. Because again, we never had any education about how to do any of these things. So bills are optional. One night, I mean, they were. I mean, the phone bill was optional. So I came home one night and there is all kinds of police activity at the place. There's crime scene tape out.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And when I was out
Was
underage
it the
drinking
lady?
somewhere. No, no. Well, first of all, I thought it was my phone bill. That's because I was such an idiot.
Cops
I'm
showing
like,
up.
yes. I'm like, I didn't pay my phone bill. What the hell? They send the cops? Again, I had no idea of what happens. Well, no, it wasn't that. It was somebody was actually dead upstairs.
Not the
That's when I
lady?
gave my notice. It wasn't the lady because she was in the
Okay.
basement. It was
Okay.
another tenant that was rarely seen. And I'm not quite sure what happened up there, but I will tell you that I gave my notice because, again, my job was to clean the place. So, yeah, I wasn't going to take any part.
Hey, what happens at the governor's mansion stays at the governor's
Yes.
mansion.
Yes. Yeah. Creepy.
Wow.
I
Yeah.
know.
Well, then what happened? You gave your notice, then what?
Nope. I actually did go to another apartment, again, another place, like a real apartment in a real apartment building. So it was my first
Moving on
time.
up.
Yep. It was moving on up. It was a real apartment building. It had great orange shag carpeting in there, and it was the bomb. And that's where I was. I didn't get evicted. I stayed there till I moved to Grand Forks at some other later time. So it was actually quite cool. Donny, I have to tell you, so after I lived in my normal apartment, I actually transferred from Bismarck Junior College to the University of North Dakota, which was the Fighting Sioux at the time. Not the
Again,
Fighting
moving on
Hawks, the
up.
Fighting
Moving
Sioux.
on
Yep,
up.
yep. There I lived in the dorm most of the time, so I kind of did it backwards. So I was the oldest person in the dorm, which was kind of weird.
Judy, was it Grand Forks or Bismarck that you were driving around with a keg in the back seat of your car?
Wow, that was in Bismarck. Yeah, that was in Bismarck. That might
Okay.
have been the night that I thought I didn't pay my phone bill when all the cops were there.
Okay. Judy, one more housing kind of story years later, and this goes back to, again, Gillette, where I had to use my real name on the radio. I did end up using multiple aliases and different names and stuff like that. A lot of people do that in radio. Television, not necessarily, but even when I worked in TV for a few years, I used my real first name, but I had a fake last name. So over the years, had multiple names. Anyway, fast forward years later, the wife and I are buying our first house in Colorado, all excited and go to the closing and getting ready to, sign all the paperwork. The closing is like, I don't know, 100 pages of paper that you have to initial and sign and fill out and do this and that. And one of the things on there weirdly said, do you go by any aliases? I didn't know what that meant. I thought that meant, but have you ever used another name? And I'm like, yes. So I wrote down the 5 or 6 different radio names that I had used at that time. And I got to tell you right now, Judy, that was not the right answer to write on that paperwork, because about 10 minutes later, we're sitting there and all of a sudden the loan officer comes in and says, all right, we got to sit down and talk about this problem. And I'm like, problem? And he goes, yeah, page 12. I go, what? He goes, these aliases. Well, yeah, I worked in radio and I had all these fake names. So to make a long story short, basically I had to explain to him, and it was more of a joke, I guess, that I had all these different names. It's not like I was in the witness protection program and living under the name of Bob Smith or something like that in Idaho. These were just names that I used on radio as aliases. So everything ended up being solved. Everything was okay. Got the house. And all's well, again, that ends well.
So, what else happened to us as we are kind of going through our journey, right, as we get a little bit older? I think that's some of what we'll be teasing out in some of our next few podcasts.